Hi there, viewers. Today we have a celebrity on the show. So, for those people who don't know about Shawna Baca, I'm going to be reading directly from a back page of the book, Fearless, Conquer the Demons of Mental Purgatory. So, Shawna Baca is an award-winning writer, director, and producer. She was selected by Steven Spielberg and Mark Bonnet from more than 20,000 filmmakers to be part of the 2007 Fox show for filmmakers. On the lot, she received a Mujires Destacade Award by La Opinion newspaper and the city of Los Angeles and was honored at the Latina Symposium in Washington, D.C. In recognition of a positive portrayal of Latino and Hispanics in the media, Shawna has been creating new media content for corporate clients ever since and has produced a feature documentary. Born in Los Angeles, where she currently resides, her heritage is Apache, Yaqui, Spanish, and French. Welcome on the show, Shawna.
Thank you, Peter. That's quite an introduction, and I am not a celebrity by any means. Nobody knows who I am.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Well, thank you for having me. I think that I met you a long time ago when I first published my book, and you were one of the first people to do an interview and kind of help promote the book. So I appreciate you and your intelligence and your tenacity and for asking me back to come hang out with you.
Welcome, it's a pleasure. Considering your autobiography book, Fearless, Conquer the Demons of Mental Purgatory, I want to specifically ask you, what was it like to suffer from panic attack?
Oh my gosh. I think it's really hard to describe. I was very young when it happened. And anybody who's suffering from panic attacks knows, or anxiety, which I think many people actually, if you didn't suffer from it back then during the pandemic, a lot of people started to suffer from the fear, right? Because that's what causes anxiety, is usually some sort of fear. Like I said, for me, it was very physical. So I didn't even equate that with anything mental, back then. So I felt like I was having a heart attack or I couldn't breathe. And there was a sense of urgency when I felt that way. Part of it was the hyperventilation, and it wasn't like I knew what hyperventilation was, and you start and you can't breathe, and your breathing becomes shallow, and your heart starts pumping a lot faster and working overtime. So sometimes you'll get chest pains because of it. And so as all these physical things were going on inside in my brain, it's like that flight or fight response was going off, that something's wrong, I'm in danger, something's wrong. And then that sort of, the psyche escalated further down the rabbit hole of like, buying into, oh my God, I can't breathe, I'm going to die, feeling, and having to rush to, a hospital. Or, at first I was always going to the hospital because I just thought it was a physical aspect of it. But by the time, you've visited the hospital like more than a half a dozen times, they start asking you questions like, well, what are your stress levels like? And, maybe you should go see a specialist. And then, I went to go see a bunch of specialists and a cardiologist, and they said that I was normal, I was fine. And I was like, no, I'm not normal. Something's physically wrong with me. So I was convinced something physically was wrong with me. And I think for people that don't really understand the process, or they're kind of going through anxiety, it is truly an internal process of one sort of battling and trying to figure out what is happening with them, and then not really having the knowledge or the tools to understand what's going on.
Wow. Wow, that sounds quite fascinating. You know, when I read your book, it actually pulls me in. I felt quite emotional. The pains you went through, etc., and all of that. Shawna, there is something that I found extraordinary about your book, and that's the street way with which you address your experience with some people in the novel. And these are people that are even close to you. You know, this characteristics is what most authors fear, that they often turn or cover up a story about their life and term it as a mere fiction, because they're probably afraid of how it will be received if they came out plain. Now, I'm curious, how did your family members, as well as your close one, whom you've mentioned their name in this book, how did they receive the book?
Well, I think that some of my family members that have read the book have received it, well, but many of my family members have not read the book.
Oh.
I know that when I was writing the book, I was a little worried about sort of painting people in a negative light. And sometimes, my mom obviously plays a big role in me telling the story of my journey. And there are some not so flattering things about her, and of course, this is all from my point of view. If she was writing the book, she would tell it from a different point of view and how she perceives things. But what I really wanted to do was show the authenticity and the rawness and the realness of it. And in a lot of cases, I hope that that book comes across as, me just telling my story about how I felt at that time, but then the revelations that I had as I matured, and not necessarily like my mother was the villain in it. So in the beginning of the book, she might be like the villain, the antagonist of it, but then coming full circle in terms of like the human evolution and, my learning process, I was able to look at things and perceive them differently. And I think that I decided to leave that in the book because I think it's important. We have our point of views. It's our emotions. It's our perspectives of how the situations went. And like they say, there's three sides to every story. There's this person's side, there's that person's side, and somewhere in there lies the truth. And but my mom doesn't read, so she's never read the book. She doesn't like reading books. So I was like, okay, well, she's not going to read the book. So, I don't have to draw that bridge, I think if she did read the book, she would probably want to write her own book and have a counter side to it. But, the actuality is, I think that as we evolve as humans, we become victims of our circumstances and our experiences in life. Yeah. And it's easy to project and portray and put the blame on somebody else. But at some point I became an adult and I had to not blame my mommy and daddy for the things that I didn't have in my life, and to take action and responsibility to correct those things, because what I've learned is that those are just experiences and circumstances. It's not who I am as a person and what my bigger purpose is. And I think you write a lot about, because I've read some of your books, you write a lot from a spiritual perspective, with a higher purpose in mind. And I think that my book is not meant to hurt anybody. If anything, I hurt myself, and I went through these things that were not so pleasant, and to not be able to I didn't want to fabricate the truth. I wanted to have that rawness and that authenticity. And a lot of people in life go through issues with family members. I mean, these are people that we didn't pick, that, were picked for us. And sometimes those can be some of the hardest relationships to really maintain.
Yeah. I really love your extensive response to this. It's actually true. It's the reality of the matter. Now, in chapter 7 of Fearless, Conquer the Demons of Mental Purgatory, you wrote about dizziness and loss of sensation. And you wrote a depressing sentence in the 4th paragraph that reads that all my faith in anything has gone out of the window. I was very pulled in when I actually read this part, because I remember reading some part of the book that sounds like poem. And we shall you pulling out all your emotions, the things you've been through. Now, I was going to ask you, what inspired this kind of write-up within your book?
All my faith basically went out the window, because at this point, for some reason as a child, I always just had this immense amount of faith. And I don't know if it was because, maybe like I was raised by my indigenous grandmother, and, you always have faith in God or a bigger purpose, a creator, that sustains and gives you this life. And I think in many, Christianity and some of the Catholicism and a lot of the religion, it's like you have hope and faith that things are going to get better, because they're sort of a bigger, person looking out for you. And to make things right. Like if you do good in life, good things will happen to you. But it's like, with me, I had so many childhood traumas, with my father dying, having an emotionally unavailable mother, feeling abandoned, like all these issues that stemmed from a very young mind and mentality, who could only perceive things from that level of maturity. A 3-year-old knows that they're abandoned, but they don't understand all the emotions that they're going through. So what do? We carry those things into, 20-year-old. So, into our lives, 20, 30, 40, 50 and beyond. If we don't deal with those issues, they stay with us. Right. And then you compound them one after the other. It just became sort of a mountain of disappointments and trauma and heartache. And so here I was, a broken person, and I didn't have the tools and I didn't have the knowledge to get myself out of it, because I didn't understand why I was feeling the way I was feeling. And I couldn't associate the palpitations to my dad dying when I was 7 months old. I just didn't have that sort of capacity and that knowledge at that point in my life. So it's like when, you have just one bad thing happening to you after another. And now you are so depressed because the stuff that you could do, like go to the store or go to a job or have lunch with friends, you can no longer do, because my panic disorder became so debilitating that it turned into agoraphobia, and I stayed in my house, and I was literally depressed. I just didn't want to live anymore, because I felt like life had really kind of broken me down. So you tend to think, where's God? Where is that light at the end of the tunnel? When is there going to be sort of that enlightenment, or something good that happens out of this? And it creates, I think, a resentment and an anger, because, you're like going, why is this all happening to me? And then kind of just not trusting the people that are supposed to love you, right, in the world, and supposed to kind of champion you, and not trusting people, and not trusting the world that you live in. The world that you live in becomes a scary place. And then there's no salvation, coming from this God that's supposed to be almighty and make things right for people that have good intentions, a good heart, and, live their life in a righteous way. So I lost that faith, absolutely, at that point.
Wow. That's so deep. Now, there's also something that I found exceptional about your book, and which is a feature that stylishly relates to African spirituality. And that is when you were cured in a sweat lodge by a medicine man in the Pala Indian reservation. You wrote that it got to a point that you realized that something was forcefully leaving your body as a medicine man was casting a chant and incantation. Now, how do you consider this as a modern day exorcism? And what influence does it permanently have to the alleviation of panic attack over Western medicine?
I actually really love this subject matter, because, in many different cultural aspects, there are these medicine people. There are these holistic elders, long before Western medicine was ever, born. But what I really love about this topic is it's always a point of discussion when you're talking to people who have no faith and don't believe in God, or don't believe in a higher power, or their spiritual sense is a little bit different. So when I say it's a modern day exorcism, I say in the book that when I was being prayed over, when that medicine man, I was in that sweat lodge and the medicine man was in there, I felt him pulling something, which is nothing short of psychic surgery. Now, one could say that, oh, is that a demon, a bad spirit? Was that really an exorcism or a possession? Like if I want to be a skeptic. And I could say, well, I can't tell you that what was extracted from me was a demon per se, but there was, we're all like energetic beings, and energy is a real tangible thing, even for the most scientific mind to wrap their head around. And what I had was a pent up and built up energy of negative emotions and this sort of ugliness of living in fear. It was fear. All of that was a fear-based energy that was taken out. And the reason that I wholeheartedly believe that and know that that is in fact true is because I felt it leave. And once it was gone, I haven't had a panic attack since. Wow. So usually, typically in Western medicine, you would see a psychiatrist.
Sure.
Psychiatrist would say, well, Shawna, you have, a panic disorder and agoraphobia, which usually is stemmed from a underlying emotional issue that that you're not dealing with, but it keeps coming to the surface, right? Emotions, energy, right? It keeps building up and building up, right? To the point that it's causing physical manifestations, right? And then I would work through this and say, okay, this is associated with your father dying. So you had a very traumatic experience when you were younger, and you weren't able to process it because you weren't even speaking then. You were 7.5 months. But therapists would say that I did suffer from that trauma because I did know that loss. And then when I was, because my mother had a nervous breakdown over my father's death, I was sent to live with my grandmother. So now my main caregiver is taken away. So as an infant, as a baby, I might not be able to express that, but I know that, So what I say to the non-believer is there was an immense amount of energy that was all negative emotions and fear-based that was extracted from me through the spiritual practices of an indigenous medicine man who pulled those things out of me. So it wasn't Western medicine that just, like boop, you change your mind. There was actually like there is no other way to imagine it, because it was there and then it was gone, and but for people that maybe have a different perspective of faith, I would say that I met with a Mayan medicine man in Mexico, in Chichen Itza, and I sat with him and I had asked him one day, I said, what do the Mayans believe about addiction? People that drink or use drugs and stuff. And he says, well, not everyone, but some people. We believe that when you drink or when you take those drugs, that there is a seed planted in you. And every time you use, and every time you take that drink,
it grows.
Seed grows until it becomes vines. And then the vines become, or become stems, and then it becomes vines, and you keep doing it and keep doing it. And eventually all those things are going to fill your body up until it becomes a spirit. And, it's like alcohol, is called spirits, right?
Yeah,
so I'm
sure.
not telling, I'm not saying that if you drink alcohol, you're going to get possessed.
I understand.
But the thing is that always stuck with me, because those emotions, those negativities, those sort of rejection against my faith, all this stuff was keeping me from living my most authentic self. And so I believe wholeheartedly that it was a modern day exorcism. What was in me was extracted from me. So you want to say psychic surgery? You want to say, if you're a non-believer, it's just energy? Well, that energy was taken out,
Wow. That's amazing, because that's one of the things that when I read it, it's stylishly or immediately I could think about a lot of things that happen here in Nigeria, the African spirituality and all of that. And I was like, I never knew this kind of artist practice even outside Africa.